horror stories for sleep. Story 1, The Lamb, by Welcome to Nowhere. Everyone has their story. Your mother's memory about playing with a Ouija board when she was younger, your father's recollection of hearing noises while camping in the woods with friends, your siblings' tales of goblins and ghouls that you know deep down were only told to scare you. My dad had one before he passed about a terrifying and ugly demon who lived in our family mansion for 19 years. Jacob, my older brother. But all jokes aside, I'm here to talk about mine. It was around 2015, sometime in October. That year was particularly painful for my family as my father had finally lost his battle with cancer that spring. He entrusted his estate to me, his only daughter, as I was set to take over his position in the family company. To make a long story short, though, I let my brother Jacob, his girlfriend Veronica, and dog Zeus room with me in that mansion. The last thing I wanted to do was sulk around all alone in Dracula's castle before my own inevitable demise. Even though it was spacious and probably worth more than the planet itself, there was always something so off about it. Rather, something was so incredibly off about the surrounding town, Dark Hallow. Even the town's name feels straight out of some Stephen King novel. There our estate stood, looming over the foggy, sleepy town, perched upon the mountain like a gargoyle prepared to feast on unsuspecting prey. It was particularly foggy driving up through the dense woods. Upon leaving the last few remnants of green foliage behind, the jagged curves and edges of the Kramer estate pierced through the melancholic moonlight. All was normal that night driving up to my childhood home. Jadis, the maid, and her husband Josiah, our groundskeeper, were just leaving for the night. Exiting my car, the air meandered in a silent waltz with the amorphous fog engulfing the land. That silence, however, it felt visceral and insidious somehow. I had no tangible reason to worry, but I couldn't help feeling as if I needed to hurry inside. While rummaging through my keys under the stone archways, I finally spotted it. Sitting atop the welcome mat laid a simple CD. It announced itself in red print, The Lamb. Curiosity clawed its way up to the forefront of my mind. That persistence led me to a decision I'd regret for the rest of my life. "What's that?" Veronica asked as I sauntered into the foyer. "It's The Lamb," I teased while presenting the disc to Veronica and Jacob. "It was in front of the door when I got home. You guys didn't see who dropped it off?" "Nah, I didn't even know someone came today," Jacob admitted while Veronica nodded. My eyes fixated on the strange item now in my possession. "Hey, Jake, can you go get my laptop from the kitchen?" Veronica sat with me in the living room and Jacob wandered in with my laptop. I took the laptop from his hands and shoved the disc into the player. To be honest, I don't fully know what I expected. Maybe some awful local artist's mixtape or something. But a video was the last thing on my mind, for some reason. The laptop screen lit up with the static remnants of what was obviously once a VHS tape. The crackly screen occasionally gave way to a viewable image of a nun playing an acoustic guitar to a group of children. She kept singing the song, "Tonight You Belong to Me," a slightly creepy in retrospect oldie, almost as if she was on repeat. "What kind of fuck-ass prank is this?" Jacob bellowed as Veronica and I laughed at his intrusion. But just before I ejected the CD and cleared my laptop of any potential viruses, Veronica noticed something. Her face. The nun in the video began to lose something about her, almost like her essence of humanity seemed to disappear. The only way I could describe it nowadays is as if her face slowly started to become AI generated. moving in unnatural and impossible ways. She no longer sang her song, but some demented version of it, like it was stuck on a short loop somewhere in the beginning and reversed. That was around the time I removed the CD and tossed it in the garbage. The next couple days were fairly normal, what with Jacob being away for work that week. Although I do recount the unexplained bumping and knocking at night that I could only rationalize away as the old mansion settling. Garbage day eventually came around and off our trash went to the dump. That day definitely had a few more odd creaks around the mansion than normal, but nothing that rang any alarm bells. It was roughly around 2 o'clock in the morning when I felt Veronica nudge me awake. "Get up," she hurriedly whispered while tugging my arm. "What?" Before I could even move, she all but yanked me out of bed. "Where's the gun?" "What? What do you need the gun for?" My eyes finally adjusted to the pitch black. Her eyes stared back at me, displaying only primal fear. "There's someone in my room." It felt like my heart just ceased, like there was a giant cavity where it should have been. I quietly grabbed the handgun from my nightstand and wandered out into the murky void of the hallway. The moonlight was no longer melancholic as it slithered through the window panes. Its malicious tendrils created unholy shapes out of the things in the dark. We silently reached her room, and I slowly grasped for the handle. Each crashing creak of her door sent chills down my spine, alerting my brain of some impending doom. Her room was as silent as a crypt, but in no way did it feel as lifeless as one. Veronica flipped the light switch on, and we scoured her room for anyone who might have been there. "Nothing." She sighed out of relief as we left her room, but before I could even turn to face her, something clawed its way through the still air of the mansion's winding corridors. Creak. I hauled ass downstairs towards the noise, making my way through the twisting and oblique hallways, gun in hand. Veronica and I finally stopped in the kitchen, staring intently at the now wide-open back door. Sitting there on the kitchen island was a single small disc. The lamb. Veronica got on the phone with the police as I closed and locked the back door. We turned on every light in that damn mansion and watched cartoons in the downstairs living room while waiting for the cops. The officers must have arrived 20 or so minutes later. We greeted Officer Reynolds, a pale man who looked like he did bodybuilding on the side, and Officer Carmichael, a friendly woman with darker skin. Reynolds and Carmichael did their rounds through the mansion, finding nothing. I remember Officer Carmichael talking to us while Officer Reynolds seemed fixated on something in the backyard. Officer Reynolds told the three of us that he would look outside while Carmichael continued taking our statements. It must have only been about 20 seconds until all three of us jumped at the sound of Reynolds slamming the back door. He walked into view, visibly shaking, with his skin even paler than before. "We need to leave," he uttered to Carmichael. And just like that, the two of us were left alone within that God-forsaken house. Needless to say, Veronica slept in my bed that night with Zeus. Have you ever just felt like someone's watching you, even if no one's there? That's what the next day was like. Constant eyes peering from every shadow in that damned mansion. It was only made worse by Zeus's newfound interest in the vents and closets. He'd give them his little sniff-spections and then just stare. Even the allure of treats couldn't break him from whatever was entrancing him. That day, I tried going about my routine as best I could. I cleaned the east wing of the mansion with Jadis, cleaned the music room and locked it up, made a late breakfast, took Zeus outside, locked the music room up, watched TV, and then locked the music room up. That day was also accompanied by the occasional banging at the door, knock, knock, knock. always in threes. Jacob's going to be gone an extra 3 days, Veronica alerted while I closed the music room door for what seemed like the 10th time that day. You told him about last night's little spook, right? Yeah. And of course he thinks we just spooked each other being alone. She giggled, but I could still see terror in her eyes. You're welcome to crash in my room for the time being. That house was already eerie enough, as is prior to the Lamb showing up. A mansion that felt as old as time itself, its architecture twisted and turned as its cavernous hallways felt like they led to endless voids of shadow. The foyer opened like a castle into a dark unknown as the chandeliers leered overhead. Those open, cavernous rooms carried the echoes of those 3 knocks as the clock struck midnight. Veronica perked up from the ottoman she was lounging on, her nose no longer buried in the Brandon Sanderson novel she was reading. We stared at each other long enough to communicate without a single word spoken. Who the hell was at our door at this time of night? She lunged from her seat and ran towards the nightstand, grabbing the handgun. I clutched onto the bat from my closet, and we both wandered through the jagged halls of murky black. The both of us quietly crept across the carpeted landing of the grand staircase and traversed down into the foyer. The front doors loomed before us, their haunting windows gazing upon us both like prey. But the strange part is how nothing stood outside in the misty moonlight. Nothing was at our door. I should have called the cops again as a precaution, yet I felt silly for entertaining that idea, with nothing being at the mansion. Veronica huffed as the shape of her white nightgown fluttered back up the staircase. I quickly followed suit. We were back within the dim marmalade light of my bedroom within a matter of seconds. Should we call a psychic? Veronica rubbed her hands together as worry plastered her freckled face. I meandered over to the vanity, bags staining the underside of my eyes. Don't tell Jacob. He's so gonna make fun of us. Knock, knock, knock. I felt the blood freeze under my skin. Veronica stared at me with a crazed panic seeping into her eyes. It wasn't at the front door this time. It was at my bedroom door. My fingers ached from the frost that now enveloped them. Zeus stood and stalked toward the bedroom door, the hair down his back, sticking straight up like spines. I slowly stood from the vanity with the bat as Veronica readied the handgun. My trembling hands threw the door open as Veronica took aim out into the nothingness of the mansion's vast hallways. The hallways lingered with emptiness, but that presence from the night before persisted. I don't know fully what it was, but both of us had the feeling that that door needed to be shut, and we need not speak of what just happened. Something was playing with us? Or was it taunting us? Either way, giving it the attention it sought would have only made it more active. We simply tried our best to sleep. Every howl of wind outside woke me. Chairs morphed into things in the dark corners of my room, and every snap of the house settling echoed like footsteps down the hallway just outside. The next morning I met with Jadis and cleaned the west wing. I put my books back up on their shelves, replaced the tablecloth in the dining room, vacuumed the game room, and put my books back up on their shelves again. Night eventually rolled around, and I said my goodbyes to Jadis and Josiah. The foyer fell silent as I glided my way up the staircase and wandered through the twisting galleries of family portraits. The shapes tucked away within the maroon wallpaper formed dancing little spirals leading back to my nightly safe haven. Veronica slept, her auburn hair peeking from the duvet. The comfort of another person being there lent to a swift whirl of sleep. Night crept on, until something stirred me from my dreams. Paws hit the floor outside my bedroom and jogged to the other end of the hall. I quietly maneuvered from under the sheets and tiptoed to my door. I questioned to myself what I was doing. But the unmistakable clinks of a dog collar emanated through the hallway. My hand moved without thought, unlatching my door. I tried my best to peer down the hallway, but couldn't make anything out in the pitch black. I looked like a total cliché as I grabbed the electric lantern from atop my dresser and slowly wandered down the passage in my blue robe. I finally managed to reach the corner of the hall and gazed down at the end. Pawing at Veronica and Jacob's door was Zeus, his little claws dragged on the door, as if desperate to escape the darkness of the mansion's hallways. Psst, Zeus, I loudly whispered in a desperate bid for his attention. My voice bounced off the mahogany walls. Zeus lunged his head back to look at me in the moonlight. Something was extremely off about that movement, almost as if he didn't know his own strength, breaking his neck to look for me. His eyes pierced through the insidious darkness, just staring at me. He finally stood up and turned his body around to face me. That's when I noticed what looked like foam spewing from his mouth in the shadows. Zeus, come here, I worriedly whispered at him. His voyeuristic gaze was lured away from my presence, drifting towards the deep, black hallway behind me. That's when I heard the pitter-patter of paws and the clinking of a dog collar skulk behind me as Zeus and Veronica emerged from the hallway. "What are you doing, Amy?" she asked. I froze, looking at the Zeus who had arrived with her, now standing at my side and peering down the corridor. I couldn't respond to her. I could only point at the other dog lurking at the edge of the shadows across the hall. Veronica's eyes went wide as she noticed the creature within our mansion. It began to lurch forward, as if just learning how to walk. Its broken waltz faded into the shadows of the hallway, where the moonlight couldn't reach. Zeus let out a deep growl as the creature merged into the murky shadows. We could only stand there as still as the dying air until a crackling made itself known. My eyes ignited with fear as the crackling source conjured into view. Brokenly lunging down the hallway was the twisted, unearthly silhouette of what should have been a person, its arms extended before it with disturbing cracks as its spine and head slithered in unnatural motions. Veronica hauled Zeus into her arms, sprinting down the hallway with me in tow. A rage of clawing tore through that hall as I tumbled down the stairs after Veronica. We stumbled down the curving corridors until we made it to the grand staircase. Upon reaching our exit, that creature let its sickening rage, known with one final wail, ripping through the foyer. We stumbled out of that house and into my car, leaving that mansion behind in a crazed hysteria. We ended up at a motel, running on nothing but pure and unadulterated fear. That night was accompanied by paranoid bouts and a lack of sleep. Our week was spent slowly going insane, locked away within a single dingy motel room. The only thing either of us could think about was Jacob's return. That day couldn't inch closer in our minds if it tried. On the day of his arrival, we called Esther Linklater, a local medium. After hearing our story, she promised to escort us back to the mansion. The state of that damned building when we met up with the sweet old woman was disturbing. Claw marks down the hallways, paint scratched off the wooden doors, every single door busted open, and the Lamb blaring through my laptop speakers, its haunting reversed song slinking down the mansion corridors. It goes without saying what the source of the haunting was, and the medium left with the Lamb securely tucked in her bag. I don't know if she still has that cursed disc with her all these years later, or if it made its way into someone else's life. I can only thank her for removing it from ours. But on that day, Veronica and I both learned the disc's true intention. Jacob's car was parked in the driveway, but he was nowhere to be seen. To this day, he remains a missing person, a sacrificial lamb. Veronica and I paid for our lives with his. Regret is an unbearable thing, a torture no one should be burdened with. Its crushing weight is only staved off by the hopes that he is somewhere better with our Father. Whoever owns that disc now, do not play it. Story 2, Ghosts in the Fallout, by the Vesper's Bell. There was a new payphone in town, at least if you believe what some anonymous conspiracy theorist had posted on the internet. Someone on the local paranormal forum had posted photos of a payphone which, to be fair, was in fairly decent condition, and they had insisted it had been installed recently. More likely than not, it had been there for decades, and neither the poster nor anyone else had noticed it until recently. I'm pretty sure the only people who pay those things any mind anymore are kids who genuinely don't know what they are or what they're for. But the poster remained quite adamant that this particular payphone was a new addition, his only evidence being some low-resolution screenshots from Google Street View from the approximate location he was talking about, none of which showed the phone. Even granting that the phone was new, that still didn't make it paranormal, and the guy wasn't really making a very coherent argument about why it was. He just kept rambling on about how the phone would only work if you put in a shiny FDR dime minted prior to 1965, when they were still made from 90% silver. He said, "Give it silver, and you'll see." When he refused to elaborate on exactly how he figured out that the phone would only work with old American coins, everyone pretty much just assumed he was full of it, and the thread fizzled out. But I just so happened to have a coin jar filled with interesting coins that I've found in my change over the years, and it only took a moment of sorting through them before I found a US dime from 1963. I honestly couldn't think of any better way to spend it. I decided to check out the phone just after sunset, in the hopes there wouldn't be too much traffic that might make it difficult to make a phone call. It was right where the post had said it would be, and as I viewed it with my own eyes, I was instantly convinced that I would have noticed it if it had been there before. The thing was turquoise, like some iconic household appliance from the 1950s. Its color and its pristine condition clashed so much with the surrounding weathered brick buildings that it would have been impossible not to notice it. Standing in front of it, I could see that there was a logo of a cartoon atom in a silver inlay beneath the name Oppenheimer's Opportunities in a calligraphic lettering. Beneath the atom was an infinity symbol, followed by the number 59, which I assumed was supposed to be read as Forever 59. It had to have been a modern-day recreation. There was no way it could have been over 65 years old and still look so good. It had a rotary dial, as was befitting its alleged time period, beneath which was a small notice that should have held usage instructions, but instead held a poem. If it's gold, it glitters. If it's silver, it shines. If it's plutonium, it blisters. Won't you please spare a dime? That at least explained how the original poster figured out he needed silver dimes to operate the thing, and why he didn't just come out and say it. I'm not sure I would have gone looking for something that might give me radiation burns. I briefly considered leaving and possibly coming back with a Geiger counter, but I figured there was no way this thing was the demon core or the elephant's foot. I also didn't have the slightest idea where to get a Geiger counter, and by the time I found one, it was entirely possible that the phone would be gone before I got back. I wasn't willing to let this opportunity slip through my fingers. Even if the phone was radioactive, brief exposure couldn't be that bad, right? I gingerly reached out and grabbed the receiver, holding it with a folded handkerchief for the radiation, I guess, shut up. It was heavy in my hand, and even through the handkerchief, I could feel it was ever so slightly warm. It was enough to give me an uneasy feeling in my stomach, but I nevertheless slowly lifted it up to my ear to see if there was a dial tone. I was hardly surprised when it was completely dead. After testing it a bit by spinning the dial or tapping down on the hook, I put a modern dime in just to see what it would do. Unsurprisingly, nothing happened. So, with nothing left to lose, I dropped my silver dime into the slot and waited to see what would happen. As the dime passed through the slot with a rhythmic metallic clinking, I could feel soft vibrations as gears inside the phone whirred to life, and the receiver greeted me with a melodic yet unsettling dial tone. I would describe it as forcefully cheery, like it had to pretend that everything was wonderful even though it was having the worst day of its life. It was a sensation that sank deeply into my brain and lingered for long after the call had ended. Thank you for using Oppenheimer's Opportunities Psychotronic Adaphone. An enthusiastic, pre-recorded male voice greeted me, sounding like it had come straight out of the 1950s. Here at Oppenheimer's, our mission is to preserve the promise of post-war America that the rest of the world has long turned its back on. A promise of peace and prosperity, of nuclear power too cheap to meter and nuclear families too precious to measure. A world where everyone had his place and knew his place. A world where we respected rather than resented our betters. We're proudly dedicated to bringing you yesterday's tomorrow today. You were promised flying cars, and at Oppenheimer's Opportunities, we've got them. We'd happily see the world reduced to radioactive ashes than fall from its golden age, which is why for us, year after year, it's forever 59. Please keep the receiver pressed firmly against your ear for the duration of the retuning procedure. We're honing in on the optimal psychotronic signal to ensure maximum conformity. Suboptimal signals can result in serious side effects, so for your own sake, do not attempt to interrupt the signal. If at any point during the procedure you experience any discomfort, don't be alarmed. This is normal. If at any point during the retuning procedure you would like to make a phone call, we regret to inform you that service is currently unavailable. If at any point you would like the retuning procedure to be terminated, you will be a grave disappointment to us. For all other concerns, please dial 0 to speak to an operator. Thank you once again for using Oppenheimer's Opportunities Psychotronic Adaphone, your only choice in psychotronic retuning since '59. The recording ended abruptly, replaced with the same insidiously insipid dial tone as before. I started pulling the receiver away from my ear, only to be struck by a strange sense of vertigo. Everything around me started spinning until my vision cut out, refusing to return until I placed the receiver back against my ear. When I was able to see again, the scene around me had changed into the silent aftermath of a nuclear attack. No, not just an attack, an apocalypse. Not a single building around me was left intact. Everything was toppled and crumbling and tumbling to dust. Dust that I could feel fill my lungs with every breath. The air was thick, gritty, and filthy, and I was amazed that it was still breathable at all. It didn't smell rotten because there was no trace left of life in it. It was dead, dusty air that no one had breathed in years. Radiation shadows from the victims caught in the blast were scorched into numerous nearby surfaces, many of which still bore tattered propaganda posters that were barely legible through the haze. The city had been bombed to hell and back, and no effort at cleanup or reconstruction had been made. It had been abandoned for years, if not decades, and yet there was no overgrowth from plants reclaiming the land. Nothing grew here anymore. Nothing could. The sky above was a strange, shiny canopy of rippling clouds, illuminated only by a distant pale light. Somehow, I knew that radioactive fallout still fell from those clouds, even to this day. Long ago, hundreds of gigatons of salted bombs had blasted civilization to ruins in a day while sweeping the earth in apocalyptic firestorms, throwing billions of tons of particulates high up into the atmosphere. Now all was silent except for that intolerable psychotronic dial tone and the insidiously howling wind. Only when I realized that those were the only sounds did I realize that they were perfectly harmonized with one another. I looked up into the sky, at the ash clouds that should have washed out long ago, and I realized it wasn't the wind that was howling. It was them. The ripples in the clouds were constantly forming into screaming and melting faces before dissipating back into the ash. I was instantly stricken with dread that they might notice me, and I wanted so desperately to flee and cower in the rubble, but I was completely unable to move my feet. I wasn't even able to pull the phone away from my ear, so I did the only thing I could. Summoning all the strength and will that I could manage, I slowly lifted my free hand, placed my index finger into the smoothly spinning rotary, and dialed 0. "Don't worry," came the same voice as before, though this time it sounded much more like a live person than a recording. "This isn't real. Not for you, and not for us. You just needed to see it. Nuclear annihilation is an existential fear no one ever knew before the Cold War, and it's one that's been far too quickly forgotten. One can never be galvanized to defend a world in decline the same way they would a world under attack. A world rotting from within invites disillusionment, dissent, and despair. A world facing an external threat forces you to fight for it, to love it wholeheartedly, warts and all. Without the threat of annihilation, every crack in the sidewalk is compared to perfection, and we bemoan the lack of a utopia, as if that were something we were entitled to and unjustly denied. When you see the cracks in the sidewalk, don't think of utopia. Think of what you're seeing now. Think of how terrifyingly close this came to reality, and how terrifyingly close it still is. And yet, you must not let the terror keep you from aspiring to greater things, as the fear of nuclear meltdowns, radioactive waste, and mutually assured destruction stunted the progress of atomic energy in your world. The instinct to fear fire is natural, but the drive to understand and tame it is fundamental to humanity and civilization. Decline is born of complacency, as easily as it is from cynicism. You must love and fight for both the present and the future. Do you understand yet, or do I need to turn the Adaphone up another notch? What are they? I managed to choke out. My head still turned upwards, eyes still locked on the faces forming in the clouds. "Now, son, I already told you this thing can't make phone calls," the man said, though not without some irony in his voice. "But to put it simply, they are the dead. The nukes that went off in this world weren't just salted. They were spiced, too. The sound waves produced by the blasts were designed to have a particular psychotronic resonance to them, causing every human consciousness that heard it to literally explode out of their skulls. Explode? I asked meekly, the tension in my own head having already grown far from comfortable. "That's right, Kablamo," the man shouted. The intention was just to maximize the body count, but there was an even darker side effect that the bomb makers hadn't dared to envision. Those disembodied consciousnesses didn't just go and line up at the pearly gates. No, sir. Caught in the psychotronic shockwave, they rode it all the way up into the stratosphere and got caught in the planet-spanning ash clouds. Their minds are perpetually stuck in the moment of their apocalyptic deaths, and since their screams are all in perfect resonance with each other, they just grow louder and louder. That wind you hear? It's not wind. It's billions of disembodied voices trapped in the stratospheric ash cloud, amplified to the point that you can hear them all the way down on the ground. So, my head's going to explode, and my ghost is going to be stuck haunting a fallout cloud for all eternity? I demanded in disbelief. Disbelief I desperately clung to, as it was the only thing keeping me from succumbing to a full existential meltdown. "Not to worry, son. As long as you don't resonate with them, you'll be fine," he assured me in a warm, fatherly tone. "Your head won't explode, and you won't get sucked up into the ash clouds. Just listen to the dial tone. Let your mind resonate with it instead. Once you believe in the wonders of the atomic age, you will be free of the fear of an atomic holocaust." "Number, you're lying. The only signal is coming from the phone, not the sky," I managed to protest. "Son, Paxton Brinkman doesn't lie. My psychotronic retuning makes it impossible for me to consciously acknowledge any kind of cognitive dissonance," the man tried to assuage me. "So when I tell you something, you had better believe that is the one and only truth in my heart. That's what makes me such a great salesman, CEO, and war propagandist. Honesty. The screaming coming from the cloud is both real and fatal, and if you don't let the Atophone's counter signal do its thing, I'm telling you your goose is cooked." "I'm sorry, is it just cooked now? Is that what the kids are saying?" "You're cooked, son, sans goose. You said it yourself. This isn't real. You wanted me to see the apocalypse so that I'll embrace salvation." "Your salvation," I managed to croak. "There are no ghosts in the fallout. You just want me to be too afraid, to reject you, to hang up, before you finish doing whatever it is you're trying to do to me." There was a long pause where I heard nothing but the screaming ghosts and screeching dial tone before Brinkman spoke again. "If you really believe that, then go ahead and hang up the phone," he suggested calmly. I stood there, panting heavily but saying nothing, my fingers still clutching the receiver and pressing it up against my ear. I closed my eyes and tried to ignore the nuclear hellscape around me, tried to focus on the fact that it wasn't real. The dial tone that was trying to rewrite my brain was the real threat, not the imagined ghosts in the fallout-saturated stratosphere. But the louder the dial tone grew, the less forcefully cheery it sounded. It didn't sound sincere, necessarily, but it sounded better than eternity as a fallout ghost. I began to wonder if it would be better to end up like Brinkman than risk such a horrible fate. Would it be more rational to choose the more pleasant hell? Or was it worth the risk to ensure that my mind remained my own? Slowly but surely, I gradually loosened my grasp on the receiver until I felt it slip from my hand. As the sound of the dial tone faded, the vertigo that I had felt from before came back tenfold, and an instantly debilitating cluster headache overcame me as I cried out and collapsed to the ground. The pain was so intense that I could barely think, and for a moment, I did truly think that my head was about to explode and that my consciousness was to be condemned to a radioactive ash cloud for all eternity. Before I lost consciousness, I remembered hearing the Brinkman's voice again, wafting distant and dreamlike from the dangling receiver. "Son, you've been a grave disappointment." When I woke up, I was in the hospital. Someone had called an ambulance after they found me collapsed outside. When I told the healthcare workers and police my story, they told me there had been no phone there, and never had been. They weren't sure what was wrong with me or if I was lying or delirious, so they kept me for observation. The fact that there was no phone and no evidence that any of it had been real was enough to make me seriously doubt it had happened at all. And I spent several hours thinking about what else could have possibly explained what happened to me. That's when the radiation burns started to appear. The doctors estimate that I was exposed to at least 200 rads of radiation, maybe more. It's too soon to say if I received a fatal dose, but it definitely would have been if I had stayed on the phone call much longer. The doctors are flabbergasted over how I could have received so much radiation, and there are specialists sweeping the streets with Geiger counters to find an orphan source. I wish I knew where I could have gotten one of those earlier. Then again, I suppose I didn't really need one. I was warned, after all. If it's plutonium, it blisters. Now it seems that I and my goose may be cooked. Story 3. The anxiety doesn't leave when I sleep. By unknown. My friends and I would ask what we'd do if the bombs started to drop. Nick was a prepper. He had a bunker out in the countryside stocked with goods and ammo that would last him through the worst of everything. He said he could live decades down there. Jamie said he'd welcome the bombs. He'd drive right to the center of the city and embrace the blast. He didn't want to deal with the aftermath of any fallout. Myself? I'd pour myself a whiskey, kick back, and wait for everything to unfold. Figure I'd watch it happen and get one last show. That's what I said at the moment anyway. I didn't really believe it. Truth be told, I'm pretty sure I saw someone comment that exact plan somewhere online. I wish I could just relax and wait for impending death. But the least relaxing thing I can think of is nuclear annihilation. I didn't really expect any nuclear warfare to happen. It was all a what if type of discussion you have with friends when you're drinking and shooting the shit, but that what if it happens started to turn into a when it does happen. The news became more and more grim as the weeks and months passed by. Ceasefires started to break. Armies began mobilizing. Democracy was failing, and escalation became more of a reality. You could tell that people were itching to say that World War III was going to happen. It was a fear couched in denial. I lost myself in drink and just tried living the best I could. Tried to avoid anxiety taking me over. Worked and went home. I refreshed the news on my phone while I live-streamed CNN or BBC for every little detail occurring in the world. With every new development overseas, there would be reports of riots or looting or emptying shelves in cities and towns across the nation. There was a cloud hovering over everything. The office started looking more and more bare as the days moved on. I think people were starting to get spooked and was taking Nick's go to the countryside route. It was starting to sound like a good idea. Sleep used to be the only solace I'd receive from the horrors of reality. However, as the days passed, my sleep became more and more restless. My dreams became more haunting and horrifying. I would have constant nightmares, and it felt as if there was a physical weight on me, holding me down while I watched the inevitable happen. I wanted to get up, run, and hide, but all I could do was lie down, forced into my bed as I faced the horrific, raging fires engulfing the land in front of me, creeping closer and closer as the hot air rushed against my skin until it boiled and bubbled me alive. I'd wake up in a sweat, feeling even worse. The fact that my anxieties were affecting my dreams meant that I could face no reprieve from the horrors that were occurring around me. I took the day off. I couldn't function. I could hardly get out of my bed. I know that we were a skeleton crew with everyone else gone, but I didn't care. I doubt my bosses cared. I scrolled through my phone, constantly looking for updates to see if anything got better. It never did. I could find no solace. It was starting to feel more hopeless by the day, and the fears were gnawing at me. A half-empty bottle and an empty stomach, and I was asleep again. The dream came back, again and again. The dream became so reoccurring, it began to feel like it was manifesting itself in the real world. When I would wake, my wrists would feel raw, as if I were rubbing them against something while I slept. I don't know what I was doing when I was dreaming, but I knew my anxieties were getting worse. My chest was tight, my teeth were chattering, my ears were ringing, I felt numb. My sheets were covered in sweat whenever I woke. It began to feel like the rooms in my home were growing a film from neglecting to clean. I shambled through my house, dirty clothes too large for me, and my hair unkempt and oily. Attempting to ail my aching stomach, I would eat dry cereal or plain bread. I could hardly feel the motivation to craft any meal. I laid on the couch, drink in hand, and watched more dread unfold onto my television. People left the city in droves, taking everything they've owned on the top of their vehicles. Military men patrolled the streets. Curfews were enforced. I gazed up and noticed small holes cratered into my wall. Noticeable damage, probably from bugs or rats. The air in my home was stuffy and acrid, as if something died in my vent. Problems that would cause such inconvenience in my life that I definitely need to contact a professional to death with it. But I couldn't even force myself to worry about those matters when so many terrifying things were happening in the world. The horrors on the screen began to drown out as I fell asleep yet again. This time my dream was different. I expected fires and destruction, a sky filled with a terrifying mushroom cloud, but they never came. This time I wasn't just being held down, I was being pushed down, forced upon, a presence thrusting itself against me, against my chest, my legs, my groin. It was wrapping itself around my body like a perverse hug, its greasy body clasping onto me and squeezing me so hard that I could hardly choke out a breath. I opened my eyes and stared forward, and all I could recognize were sharp, crooked things grinning at me. They would open and gnash, and I could feel the hot, oily steam come from its mouth and waft against my face. I snapped awake. More sweat stained the sheets in my bed. Strange. I thought I fell asleep on the couch. I rubbed my wrists and my shoulders. I felt sore. I felt damp and gross. I moved from the mattress and drunkenly stumbled into the dark shower and let the warm water envelop me. This shower was for pleasure, not business, of course. I haven't felt the need to properly clean myself in weeks. I know I reeked. Everything around me stunk and felt slimy. But putting soap on a loofah felt like a Herculean task. It was much easier to just sit and let the water pour on me with the lights out. The warm water felt good against my aching body. I began to dry myself and turned the lights on. As I did, I noticed brown and red and blue marks splotching my body. What the hell? I traced the spots with my fingers and winced. These were fresh bruises. I knew my dreams were getting worse, but I didn't know I was harming myself in my sleep. As I left the bathroom, I slipped on liquid I carelessly left on the floor. I was becoming a mess. I attempted to perform some self-care. In a world that feels like it's on the brink of destruction, it felt impossible. But I avoided the things I knew would trigger any anxieties. I tried avoiding the news for the day. I knew things were getting worse, but I didn't need to constantly remind myself. I put the shutters down, draped blackout curtains on every window, and avoided any outside activities. The military trucks moving through the streets were a crushing reminder on their own. I unplugged from everything. The house was dark and comforting. I noticed my home was in disrepair from the months of negligence, but I needed to focus on comfort. I laid beneath my soft blankets on the couch and let old movies play in the background. I pretended that nothing was happening in the world, and it was nice. I wondered if I'd actually be willing to sit outside with a nice drink and watch the bombs fall. Sitting here in isolation feels like it may actually be more comforting. If I could go back, I'd tell my friends that that's what I'd do. Die in the darkness and ignorant of the world. Alone. I stirred awake. My first thought was that I didn't dream. I suppose I was successful in keeping the horrible thoughts at bay. That slight comfort disappeared, however. I was back in my bed, and I know I didn't come here on my own. The lights were off. My room was pitch black. Everything stunk of hot grease, like fried food that's been rotting in the sun. The suffocating feeling from my dreams came back. I knew that I wasn't dreaming, though. I threw my sheets off. I ached. I stumbled out of bed and flicked the lights on. My bed was soaking wet. It looked like oily piss staining the mattress. I scanned around and noticed the walls were pockmarked with more holes everywhere. I moved cautiously towards a hole and studied it. Coming from each hole was a smelly liquid that oozed out like they were spigots funneling the stuff inside. I spun around to exit my bedroom, opening the door to a darkness that looked as if it were a physical force. I could faintly recognize more hole marks dotting the hallway. Something was in my house vandalizing my stuff. I remember seeing swarms of people invading homes and breaking things, stealing whatever they could. They must have gotten to me doing some weird torture bullshit. I slowly moved through the darkness, keeping my head down. I crept 1 foot in front of the other, avoiding the groan of my wooden floor. I noticed that my feet would land on top of a slick puddle of something. I assumed it was the same grease coming from my walls. A sizzling noise was coming from the kitchen. It sounded like grilling meat on a wheezing stove. What the hell were they doing in my kitchen? The curiosity outweighed the fear in the moment. I crept forward and peeked around my corner, attempting to balance on the slick floors. I expected to see some moronic looter frying bacon in the pitch darkness, pissing haphazardly in every direction. Maybe I could take him on, tackle him, and call for help. I stumbled forward and saw no one. My kitchen was empty. Drawers were open and silverware spilled onto the floor. I could make out a glossy gleam on everything, reflecting what little light it could into the darkness. I knelt down and fingered the floor, feeling more of that liquid coating it. I lifted my hand to my nose to smell it. It shared the same odor as the stuff in my bed. This stuff was everywhere. I needed to get out of here. This place was no longer safe. I could hear the sizzling again. This time it held a weak cough underneath of it. I was on all fours now. The oily liquid was coating all of the floor now, like it was rising within my house. I don't think I'd be able to run without slipping on it and busting my ass. I frantically began to crawl towards my way out of my home, squeaking and sloshing as I did. My hands slipped against the floor, and my face nearly smacked into the slime. The smell clung to my nostrils, and I struggled to not retch. The temperature felt as if it was rising. It was getting harder to breathe. The grease was making it hard to move. I made myself towards the couch and hugged against it, trying to catch my breath. I noticed it was bent and broken. The wood splintered out of the sides like something huge sat on it, where it buckled under the weight. My vision was catching up with the darkness, and I could vaguely make out my door. Nothing between the door and me. A straight shot. I was going to go for it. Try not to slip. I readied myself and pushed myself up towards the door in a sprint. I was almost free, safe from whatever was in my home. My anxieties were nearly gone. My hand grabbed the door. I prepared to leave. Then distant sirens began to blare. It was a sound I only heard in movies. I didn't recognize it as real. They were a droning noise, alerting all of us that we were soon to be bombed. I stumbled backward from the door. I turned around absent-mindedly, liquid squeaking under my feet. The oily substance sticking between my toes, making it difficult to stand still. In front of me was my dark living room. My nose was filled with a stinking hot rot. All I could hear was a droning horn in the distance. This is how everything was going to end. In a miserable void, trapped in grease and noise. Alone. In a desperate act of control, I reached over and fumbled with the light switch, illuminating the room. I truly didn't want my final moments to be in the dark. I wanted to know what was happening in my home, even if it was an unpleasant knowledge. My living room was ruined. More of those holes pocked within the ceiling and walls, with yellow water draining out. My floors had a slick lining of that oil. Liquor bottles rested haphazardly in the gunk. My furniture was ripped and stained. I expected to see some manic, insane person sleeping on my couch, helping himself to my stash of booze in a disgusting slime of his own creation. At least we could spend the rest of our lives together. Two sad, drunk, pathetic strangers waiting for nuclear obliteration in a greasy abode. Instead, in front of me stood a grotesque figure, a shining obsidian humanoid balancing on two thin and crooked legs. Its fragile, bony body was hunched to cater to the massive, pulsing crest that adorned its head. Protruding bone-like tumors covered where its eyes would have been. The jaw was filled with crooked razor teeth that hardly fit its human-sized mouth. It faced my direction with an expression that I could only guess was a smile. Seeping from the pores on its crest was that glossy, smelly soup that smacked into the ground like a leaky faucet. All I could do is stare in befuddlement. I surprisingly wasn't terrified. An alien figure that was reminiscent of a demonic skeleton somehow was less scary to me than the impending nukes. I know some cultures and religions have ideas of beings shepherding them to the afterlife. Maybe that's what this thing is. Might as well be. So, I asked, "Are you the Grim Reaper? Death?" The figure gazed in my direction. I don't know why I expected anything from it. I suppose I was trying to find comfort in anything at this moment. The beast gurgled in what could best be described as a laugh. It opened its maw and allowed syrupy chunks to fall to the ground. It angled its head up towards me as high as it could, as its crest hit the ceiling, preventing it from looking up any further. I think it was responding to me. No actual words left its crooked mouth. I rested my back against the door, sliding down to my ass, unsure what to do. I looked at its glossy black body and readied another question. Before anything could escape my lips, it rushed towards me in an instant. I attempted to get back up, but slept against the slime on the floor and immediately crashed down onto my back, smacking my head into the yellow puddles. I stared forward and saw the thing on top of me, its wide, bony hands pressed against my wrists. It slowly began to put its weight on my body. I recognized this feeling. This isn't the first time I've seen this thing. It's been around me for weeks, months. Every single night I was experiencing this suffocating creature. It was torturing me, and now it was going to kill me. The monstrosity was pushing itself against me. I could feel the rotting slime rising up around, slurping me up as it covered my body. My breathing became labored, and my vision darkened. I could feel the force of its sharp ribs digging into mine, making my chest ache with an intense pain. Its jagged mouth retched and coughed, that hot steam that I've experienced only in my sleep. The sirens drowned out my hearing, a haunting reminder that I was soon going to be the next target of falling missiles. I was ready for this nightmare to finally be over. Everything began to cloud and numb, but that wasn't how I wanted to go. I don't know why, but in that moment I really wanted a whiskey. Suppose it's the will to live and the human spirit. I absent-mindedly reached out against the floor, worming my hand through the slick goop until I felt something cool and glassy. I grabbed it as firmly as I could and slammed it into the side of the obsidian creature. The attack didn't damage it, but it was just enough to confuse it and gave me time to slip out from under its body. I braced myself and pushed myself up, trying to maintain my balance on the slick floor. I readied myself to attack the monster again. It stood impressively tall and imposing. Despite that, however, it seemed just spindly and unbalanced enough that I think I could take it on. I studied the half-empty bottle that I grabbed. Fortunately, it was sturdy enough to daze it. Perhaps a couple more blows and I might be able to put it down. The sirens blaring in the background were a sobering reminder that my life won't be around much longer. I studied the creature in front of me, hearing the sizzling gasps escape its throat. I found purchase in the slick ooze. I held my makeshift weapon firm in my hands, readying myself to plant it deep into the intruder. I needed to make my move before it lunged at me again. I pushed myself towards the skeletal monstrosity, being sure to angle the bottle towards the creature's delicate chest. If I were to slip, I wanted to be positive that it connected against its ribs. The slime underneath my run propelled me with enough force to knock into the monster. I lunged the bottle between its ribs, hearing a sizzling pop as they cracked. The ebony skin tore open to reveal even more of that stinking hot sludge that coated everything around me. I dug my heel into the floor, angling myself and pulling to make the creature lose its balance. Its weak legs bent inwards and collapsed, tumbling downwards and splattering lukewarm gunk into the air. It didn't seem to fight back, opting to instead choke and wheeze in my face in a bastardized chuckle. I pulled the bottle out from its ribs and lifted it up, pushing it into its neck and twisting it upwards against its jaw, shattering its teeth from its mouth. I was on top, straddling it, forcing myself onto the creature. The tumors on its face inflated and quivered like fleshy balloons. I viciously bashed the sacs, ripping them open and releasing the humid gas inside. I punched its brittle arms and felt the bones snap and wither with every blow. Its bony crest, jutting out of its head, knocked into the walls and furniture as it thrashed its head back and forth. I was in a fury. The only control I had in this moment was making sure this thing was dead. My body ached, not from the multiple bruises that this monster has given me over the months, not from the suffocating fear and anxiety that had me in a vice. It ached because I was tired. I was exhausted. Beneath me lay its crumpled, inky corpse. Its bones and tumors were torn and broken. Its massive head was jutting to the side, jaw crooked and lifeless. The cracks in its form poured more of that thick, sour soup. I clung to the bottle in my hand, as if I never wanted to let it go. A makeshift mace mere moments ago was now a security, a safety, a comfort. Dismounting from the obsidian corpse, I struggled to stand as I slipped on the goo. I looked around at my surroundings one last time, taking everything in. The light of the sun shined through a crack from my blinds, reflecting against the yellow pools that stained and clung to every surface in my home. It was a shimmering, glossy sight. The craters in my walls provided strange textures, appearing like perverse black stars in a white sky. I shuffled through the gunk. The only noise was that constant blaring in the distance and the soft, sloshing liquid underneath my feet. I sat on the remains of my filthy, destroyed couch and ripped off the remaining blackout curtain, getting a good view of the outside world. I thought of attempting to turn the television on to get an update on what was happening. It probably didn't even work with all the piss-colored sludge that covered it. I didn't need any updates anyway. It wouldn't help anything. The sirens that filled my ears for what felt like an eternity finally stopped. I peeked outside and saw what caused them to cease. I felt the weight of the bottle in my hands that I've been clutching all this time. I unscrewed the top and wiped off any slime that covered the spout. I turned it in my hand. Scotch. I laughed. Not quite the same, but it'll do. I put the bottle to my lips and I was able to finally relax and feel a sense of calm. I watched the beautiful red and orange explosion in the distance release vibrant flames in my direction. I closed my eyes and smiled.